welcome to another episode of Illustration Masterclass. Today I am going to be looking at the illustrator Alex Kruglov. I'm pretty sure that's not how you pronounce his name, so I do apologize for that. I'm assuming this is a Russian guy. I found him on ArtStation. I checked out some of his art, and I thought, oh my God, I really want to pull this guy's stuff apart and see what I can learn from it. So, as usual, all the links to this guy's work that I find, I'll put those in the description box, as well as links to my own work are all in the description. But let's go ahead and let's get started. So typically, whenever I start these, if you've been watching them, I like to pull out and I like to see what it is that I notice from a distance, right? This is another great example of somebody who's really a master at composition, because even from a distance like this, you can still pick out the silhouette, you can still see the general framing of the illustration. And as we get closer and closer to the illustration, it just becomes cooler and cooler, right? So there's different framing elements. One of these framing elements is just the gesture of the head here on this figure over here, and the sword pointing up, which is pointing us directly there. This acts as a framing device that takes us here, and you could say it takes us here, and you could almost say this is a converging line that connects with this arm. It's flowing in the same direction and takes us to here and points us here, right? In the background, we have a lot of use of atmospheric perspective, or well, actually, let me go back to talking about the foreground. So in the foreground, you know, as it's typical, we have a slightly darker values, or much darker values actually, in the foreground elements of these figures, which separate the foreground, the midground, and the background. So in the background here, we have a very light value going on in the background. So he has a lot of atmospheric perspective, which just means, you know, as things recede in the background, they become lighter because of the atmosphere, this green atmosphere that he's added to the image. And then as we get closer and closer to the image, we have this we have this focal point that has all of the detail. And by all of the detail, I mean all of the variations of contrast, color, everything. He pretty much saves it and spins all of that energy here, right? Which makes sense because that's where our focal point is. You know, we have this focal point here, which is, again, it's pointing us here, or I guess you wouldn't say this is a focal point, but we have this other element here. And this is taking us up. This is taking us in. You could say this is taking us in. Look at all the different converging lines that are pointing us down to the character, right? Everything in this image, even something like this, it might not be that obvious, it's still kind of pointing us to this figure here. This is going up. This is going up. Everything is taking us to this central focal point. And that's where he puts the most amount of detail. As we can see, as we zoom in, we see more and more detail. You see he's got some sort of hieroglyphs on his body. The name of this is the necro mech, which is a really cool idea. So he's like a necromancer who has like a mech made out of like the dead bodies of I guess of monsters or people that he's killed. Really cool concept. So we see that there's a lot of contrast going on in here. There's a lot of contrast going on in here in terms of he has this light atmospheric background here, and then he has this dark, heavily rendered figure here in the midground. And then we see it switches again. We have another light background with a dark figure here. And so this is like a light, dark, light, dark. And guess where all these ribs are pointing? They're all pointing us directly to our neuromancer, right? Even his arms, you could say. And the teeth here, they're all pointing downwards onto him, right? So there's so many different elements of this that are leading us directly to it, but when we pull out, it looks so complicated, partly because he has the perspective skewed sideways. And as we've talked about in previous episodes, I'm just drawing some lines over these converging lines and lines that are diagonal that I'm seeing in the image. Whenever you want an image to look dynamic, you want to have something that has a lot of diagonals in it. This is like a skewed perspective of a camera. And another thing it is that creates that cinematic feel in this painting he's done is that these figures in the foreground, they're on either side, and typically what it is that you see with some of these shots is you'll even see the foreground elements blurred a little bit, but he doesn't do that. He doesn't really necessarily need to do that because there's such a strong separation between this atmospheric element and the character itself, right? So let's go ahead and let's close this out and let's look at a couple other things. These are some process stuff that I saw he had posted, and so I thought this would be cool to go through and look at. So he has his initial idea, right? And it's very rough. It's a very rough idea, but you can see the composition is basically there, right? The composition is basically there. And then he takes it into a line art. And what does he do whenever he takes it into a line art? Well, essentially what he's doing is he's breaking each one of these elements down into a different gradient. Okay, so he's got his background, which is a light gradient, or I'm sorry, values. He's got his background in a light value, and then there's a midtone, another midtone for the necro mech, and then there's a darker tone for the foreground characters. I thought it was interesting as well that he did these in a line art style, which is not the way it is that it looks at the end, which I thought was interesting. Another thing it is that you could probably, there's a couple of different things it is that he does differently. For one, he moves this. He moves this right here. He moves this cross. Looks like he might even pull this character back a little bit. We'll have to see. But I do think he moves his cross. Now, the things it is that I notice here is that, or things that I'm thinking of, is he's basically breaking them down into the different value structures, and he's keeping them on different layers so he can move them around if he wants to. And now we get the base colors. And even at this level, I mean, this looks like a finished illustration. This reminds me of a quote it is that I heard by Drew Struzman. And he said that at every stage you want to try to make the illustration complete. You want it to be finished. You want it to look finished. And so you can see that he really takes that to heart here. Right? And then we get to the fun stuff. We start to get to the shading, and we start to see that he's dropping in some shadows. And it's interesting that like these shadows here in this foreground characters are kind of, I mean, on this character it feels like it's haphazardly put on there. Anyway, then we go into lighting. And so he's put down his shadows, and then he starts coming in with the lighting. And where does he put the lighting? He's putting the lighting behind it. So he hits this area, this area, this area with the light. He hits the top of this as if there's a light that's coming down like this. So he's hitting the light here and here and here and here. And then this is his render. He's basically taking all of this and he's just going wild with it and blending it together. And this is the result it is that he comes up with, which is just insane. Beautiful work. Let's take another look at one of his other processes real quick, and then we'll go ahead and call this video. Again, we have this pretty quick, rough-looking sketch. He has a sketch of what it is that he wants, and clearly the guy has enough experience that he's not always super concerned with maybe the tightness of the sketch at first. He keeps it pretty loose, and then he takes it into some flat gray tones. Right? He's figuring out which one is going to have what value. What is the value range going to be for each one of these characters? And he has a subtle gradient on this back character. Then we go into the next phase where he adds in color. He adds in drops of color throughout. It's interesting to see that he has so many variation of color on the side of this wall, on the side of this boat here, right? So it's kind of got like a rusted texture to it. Same thing with the jackets on these characters. There's kind of a blue, a greenish blue hue that's shown in different variations. You see a strong green here, but then we see this light blue here, and we see like a light green within the characters themselves. This guy's jacket is green, and so there's this play off of that, but then there's also this dirty orange color. Right? There's this dirty orange color that's kind of stained all over the jackets and whatnot, or it looks like some sort of backlighting on this guy. And then we we go into this, which is, let me zoom back out, which is, oh my god, incredible. And I'm curious what the difference is between these three. Okay, so I think these are like variations. Right? So he's got this one, and he's got this one here. It looks like the variation is in the lantern. The lanterns are different. Oh, okay, so these are not, these are still process sketches. It just wasn't completely clear to me. Yeah, so this is the result he ends up at, which is just absolutely insane. He's got spirits. So if we look at it from this perspective of like, what are the rules that we see here? We could say that these are leading us here, right? We've got lots of converging lines going on that are creating some interesting dynamics throughout the piece. Yeah. So anyways, guys, again, you can check out his work in the links below. I'll also have more process videos up and stuff like that here pretty soon. So thanks, guys, for watching. And make sure to like and subscribe, hit the notification bell, and there will be another one of these coming out next week, as they come out every week. Thanks, guys. Take it easy.